Hi, I'm Charlie, and today we're going to install the Fusion Oxi-Gen system. This is by far one of my most favorite systems that we sell. Um, it's really neat how it works and what it does, and it produces very little byproduct at all by an oxidation process. Typically that's not the case. If you're using chlorine or other things like that, you'll end up with some type of byproduct. The good thing with an Oxi-Gen system is we're using peroxide and injecting it into water. Everybody knows the chemical name for water is H2O. Well, the chemical name for peroxide is H2O2. So if your water has a contaminant in it, such as sulfur or iron, then we need to oxidize that some way. So when we put in peroxide and we inject that in, that H2O2, that extra oxygen molecule in that liquid, will actually attack the iron and oxidize it. And then by default, the byproduct, when you pull that extra oxygen molecule away, becomes H2O. So really, there is no byproduct. When we get the reaction is completed, then basically we just have water. And then once that contaminant's been oxidized, it happens in real time. So I mean, we don't need retention tanks, we don't need anything else. It's going to happen immediately. And then that water is going to come into a catalytic carbon tank, and that catalytic carbon actually acts as the catalyst to catch the reaction. So as this happens and the metal, the iron or sulfur precipitates, then the reaction takes place on the carbon substrate and crabs that from the water. So the water leaving the carbon filter is iron or sulfur free. This is by far one of the most robust systems out there as far as water treatment. It works every time it's applied correctly. We've been doing it for over 17 years, and the only time it hasn't worked is because there's something else going on that we found out about. In a lot of cases, it'd be some other type of gas, methane or something like that, that's interfering with the oxidation process. So it's been a while. We haven't done this video yet, but I'm glad we are, because like I said, this is one of my most favorite systems to install. When you get your system, it's going to come in several different boxes. There's going to be some fittings and as well as some screws to put things together. And we're going to go through this component by component, and you can kind of see what fittings that you'll get with the system. Now, a lot of this is going to come together in one box. As far as like the injection pump and the bracket and the water meter and possibly even the filter housing are all going to come together in one box. You will get media in another set of boxes. This particular unit is a 2 cubic foot unit, so we have 2 full cubic feet of catalytic carbon, and then there's gravel. We always put gravel at the bottom of the catalytic carbon tank to help facilitate a backwash and move the water more evenly through the carbon bed. So you'll get several boxes here. A lot of times this may come on a skid depending on the size that you have, just because it makes more sense to ship it that way. If not, you could get it as separate packages in UPS, just depending on the size again. So with that being said, once we kind of get everything, we're going to kind of lay it out. You should have your carbon and your gravel. You should have your carbon tank with the distributor inside. You should have your control valve, and there's a manual that'll come in there, as well as the installation kit. You should have a series of fittings, as well as screws. We have filter wrench. Then we have our brackets for our filter, our actual filter, our bracket for our injection pump, our water meter to engage the injection pump, and then this is the solution tank that we'll use to actually hold the peroxide. So all these things are going to come together in several boxes. Once you have it, we're going to kind of lay it out and make sure we have everything we need. Now, we don't ship extra gravel. We don't ship extra carbon. So everything that we ship to you will go into the tank. Gravel always going in first. Now, we're ready to start. What we're going to do is we're going to start with the very first component, which is the filter housing. So when we do the filter housing, you have the ability to put the bracket on the housing how you want it to go. And this depends on which way the water is running in your house. If you're running from right to left, then obviously you'd put it to the right first, or vice versa. So that bracket, depending on which side of the housing you put it on, will facilitate a right-hand feed or a left-hand feed. Today we're going to do left-hand feed, and we're going to put everything together on this board, ultimately to the carbon filter and then out. This is a mock install because I don't have troubled water here, so I really can't show you the entire oxidation process and things like that. I can kind of give you some pointers and some ideas of how it would work, kind of how the water will look when we start to do the peroxide injection procedure called the bubble test, or the bubble method. So first and foremost, we're going to move this stuff out of the way, and then we'll be back and we'll start to install the actual big blue sediment filter for the first component. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is install the sediment filter. When you pull it out of the box and you open it up, there should be a wrench, a bag of screws to fasten the bracket to the actual filter housing. Now, I'm going to show you on the filter housing here. You have a in and an out arrow. So depending on this, for us, we're going left to right, so we're going to have the in on this side. Be just vice versa if we was going the other way. So that will also dictate which way you put the bracket on. So for us, with the left-hand feed, we're going to put the bracket on with the inlet on the left. So you pull your bracket out of here, and you can see the bracket has these cutouts, and that's to go around that red pressure relief button that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But we're going to mount it on here like this. Now, the screws that we send, these are self-tapping screws that will cut threads into this housing. If you happen to have to take these out and put them back in, make sure you turn them backwards until you fall in and find the original screw threads, because if you continue to run these in and out, you'll round out the housing and you won't have anything to tighten to. So make sure you have these in there the first time, and if you do have to take them out, take care when you put them back in to use the same threads. So I usually just get them started, and then you can either use a ratchet and a wrench, or if you have a cordless drill and some hex inserts, you can use those, and that's kind of what we use here because we build so many. So I'm going to put this on here, and then I'm going to grab our drill and tighten these down, and then we'll get this mounted to the wall and plumbed in. Okay, so now we have our bracket tightened down on our filter housing, so we're going to go ahead and tape up our fittings to plumb it all together. We're using John Guest Speed Fit fittings today just to make this installation quick and easy. There's other materials out there you can use depending on what's in your home. These particular fittings will work with PEX or copper CTS, so they're pretty robust. They may be a little bit more expensive than regular plumbing fittings, but they definitely make your life a lot easier. So we're gonna tape up a lot of our fittings right now. We're gonna get them installed in here, and then we'll come back and show you installing this on the wall, but we're gonna spend the time, tape everything up, and get our fittings kind of installed. Okay, now we have our big blue filter housing in place. This is the sediment filter. The main reason why we use this filter is if you happen to have sediment, for one, but also if you have ferric iron, we really don't want to gum that up or send all that into the water meter and gum all the impeller and everything up. So we put this first in hopes that we can remove that stuff prior to getting to the water meter. When it gets to the water meter, we're hoping that it's all ferrous iron and it's still in solution. So that's the main reason for putting this in there, is to protect the water meter, but it's also to remove sediment from the process too, just so we don't end up putting sediment in our carbon filter and things like that. So with that being said, again, we're going to put a filter in there, but we're going to come back to this when we start to do the startup. That's when we'll put the filter in and discuss the startup at that point. So the next thing that we're going to do is we have to install a water meter. Now, when we ship the water meter, it will come in a box separate, and it's going to have nuts and then the actual fittings and washers, and then it will have the actual water meter itself with a wire coming off. Now this wire is what will actually feed the injection pump to let it know when to pump and how, we can do it in proportion to the water that we're running through it. So the first thing that I do is I go ahead and assemble this meter, somewhat mock it up, and we can tighten it up after we get the plumbing done. But I want to show you how these fittings go on. So you're going to have a nut, and then you'll have the nipple fitting, and then you have this washer. So you're going to put the nipple fitting through the nut, and then this washer will fit inside like that. You take the cap off of the water meter itself, and then we're going to screw this down onto the water meter snug. And we'll do that on both sides. That'll allow us to somewhat mock up the plumbing. And once the plumbing's all tight, then we can actually crank these down and tighten them down. But for now, we're just going to hand tighten them on here. The other thing I want to show you too, if you can see it, but there is an actual direction arrow on here that shows the direction of flow. So make sure you have that pointing the right way. For us, we're going to be pointing this way because we're going left to right, but you may actually be just the opposite if you're going right to left. So make sure you have this arrow pointing the right way, otherwise this thing will not pick up and read properly. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to put these fittings on, and then also we supply bushings for this, and that's what goes on here, but this is what switches this from 3/4 to 1 inch. We like to keep everything 1 inch through the system, but if we do a 1 inch meter, it has a hard time picking up very low flows. That's why we go to the 3/4 meter. Now this little bit of restriction is usually not enough to tell, especially on a well water system. So, I mean 99% of the time you're not even going to know the difference, but this will pick up really small usages such as an RO system or something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to prepare this the rest of the way and put our fittings on with some tape, and then we'll get our actual John Guest fittings in, and then we'll start to actually plumb this in and then move on to the next aspect. Okay, now we've kind of installed our water meter in place here, and again, depending on the plumbing you have, maybe yours is a lot closer and things like that, but what we're doing here is we're using speed fit fittings so I can do this video quickly. So obviously if this was your application, we would secure this with some type of pipe hanger or something so it's not flopping, but for this video, I'm just trying to get through this so we can get to the technical parts of this. So once this is installed, your arrow's facing the right way, then now we're going to move to prepare the carbon filter. We want to finish the carbon filter and get basically everything plumbed in, and then we'll come back and do the injection pump last. So to prepare the carbon filter, the first thing you would do is you're going to put your actual distributor tube in the tank, and make sure that this tank has water in it because we use it for a test tank, but we're going to make sure that it's centered in the bottom of the tank, and you can kind of feel when it's centered because it'll fall down in a hole. There it went. And then when it's done, it'll be exactly flush to the top. So now once this is in place and we know it's secured, then we use a piece of tape and cover this tube, because when we pour the gravel and the carbon in here, we don't want to get anything in this tube, so we put a piece of tape over the top of it. And again, it's important to have it centered in there so you make sure that this thing fills properly. But once that's centered, and we actually put a piece of tape over it, then we can put our funnel in. Then we'll pour all our gravel in, pour all of our carbon in, then remove your funnel, remove your tape. Now, I'm not going to pour it in here for the purpose of this video, but when you get your gravel and carbon, you're going to put the gravel in first and the carbon in last. We don't send extra gravel and we don't send extra carbon, so put every bit of it in that we send. It's crucial that you make sure that this is taped and you make sure that it's centered before you start pouring it in. If it's off to the side or whatever, it could cause a problem when you try to put the valve on. So make sure it's centered, and then once you're done, remove the funnel, remove the tape, and then we can go forward to putting the valve on. So once we have all the carbon in there, we remove the funnel, remove the tape, then we're going to prepare the valve. Now, I have a tube of US water silicone grease here, but you're going to get some little packets that come with it, and you can use that to actually lube the O-rings. But before we put what's called the upper basket on the valve, we want to put some some grease on the O-ring in here so it actually fits over the distributor tube easily. So what I do is get a little on my finger here and kind of wipe it around in there, and then I get a little bit more and wipe it on this outer bigger O-ring that actually will seal to this white Teflon part of the tank. So that way nothing will hang up when we're actually screwing the valve on. So once we've done that, now this has, I don't know if you can see it there, but it's kind of like a little twist lock mechanism that locks it in the bottom of the valve. So you'll find the little tabs there and it'll fall in place and then block it in place, and then it'll stay on. Now, once that's done, the valve's ready to put on the tank. So what we do is the hole in the bottom of this basket goes over the distributor, and then the valve goes down on there, and then kind of wiggle it around until you get it in the threads, and then spin it in the threads. Now you can see how easy that spins in. If yours is not spinning in that easy, you probably have it cross-threaded, so don't go any further. You know, you make sure you have it, if you have it exactly right, when you tighten it down, it'll spin right in like that. And then I go ahead and take my hands and tighten it up, and then I take the palm of my hand and just give it a couple taps just to make sure that it's nice and tight. So once that's done, then you're going to somewhat move it in place, and we're going to put some fittings on the back of this before we come out of here. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to flip this sideways and show you how the fittings go on. I'm going to plumb all this together, and we'll come back and I can kind of show you how the fittings go on it, and then we can move into actually plumbing it into the system. So let me get this prepared, and then we'll come back and talk about the fittings. Now, when you get your backwashing valve and you open it up, it's going to come with some different fittings. There's some 3/4 fittings, but there's also these 1-inch straight fittings, and that's what we're going to use for an Oxi-Gen system. You're going to have a stainless steel nipple, a plastic reducing bushing, a stainless steel T, and then this is actually one of those 1-inch fittings taped up. So what I've done is I went ahead and taped this and put it all together, and it's going to go to the inlet side of the carbon filter. Now, if you look on the carbon filter, there's arrows on the side here. The one facing away is out, the one facing the unit is in. So in this case, the in is facing the unit and it's on this far side, so we're going to slide this in place here on the inlet, and then take one of the clips and lock it in place. We're going to do the same thing here. Now, a lot of times these O-rings are already pre-lubed, but if they aren't, go ahead and use some of that lubrication that you have and put on there and put these in, because if they're not pre-lubed, they're hard to pop in there, and you could roll them. So make sure you lube them up first. But basically, these are our 2 connection points now for our system. So we got to convert this to our PEX plumbing here, and then this will be our outgoing pipe that will convert, and I'm just going to use probably I would say I'll probably just use a flex connector for the outlet just for the purpose of this video. But this is how this is going to assemble with all these fittings on the inlet. This open hole here in the T is where we're going to install the injector for the actual peroxide, so that's going to stay open for a minute. So right now we're going to move this in place, and we're going to plumb the in and out pipe, but we're also going to plumb the drain line for the carbon filter. The drain line needs to go to a sanitary drain, preferably not any place that's going to freeze or back up, because if this can't backwash properly, it's going to load up with iron and it's not going to work. So make sure you have a drainage point that's going to accept the flow from this. Depending on what size your tank is, depends on what your backwash flow rate is. So make sure first of all, your system can flow at a rate that can backwash the filter properly, but also make sure that your drain can accept that flow rate once we do backwash this. So this is a 1/2 inch hose barb, so you need a 1/2 inch ID 5/8 OD tubing that you can run from this over to a drain. If you have to run up and over, make sure you run straight up, and then make sure you do a drop on your linear pipe, so that way there's no back pressure on this unit. The only back pressure would be the lift to the fulcrum point, and then let the water run downhill to the drainage spot. So those are all things to keep in mind when you're running the drain for this. So we're going to plumb this in, we're going to plumb the drain in, and then we'll come back and talk about the key points there, and then we'll move on to the injection pump. So we're going to plumb this in, we'll be right back. Okay, once we've installed this, we've got the plumbing in and out of it. Now we're going to install the chemical injection pump. We're going to actually install the pump on the tank and do all the tubing. We'll put the injector in here, and then I'll show you how it wires to the actual water meter here that actually engages it. So we're going to go ahead and get this stuff over here and prepared, and then we'll talk about how that installs next. Okay, now that we've got this plumbed in and the drain, I forgot to mention to make sure you put a hose clamp on the drain and tighten it down tight, because it will drain with force and it could blow that off there depending on what's going on. So make sure you get a clamp on there. But our next aspect here is to install the chemical injection pump, and that's what this is here. Now, you're going to get the pump itself, you're going to get a bracket that comes with it, you're going to get a roll of tubing, you'll get a set of 4 self-tapping screws, and then a set of 2 mounting screws to mount the pump to the actual bracket. Now, the other thing that you get is, of course, the owner's manual, but you're going to get a weighted strainer. This will go inside the tank on a tube, and that's what allows that tube to be weighted and stays at the bottom. And then we also have what's called the injection tube. This particular injection tube is what we're going to screw in here, and it's a check valve that doesn't allow water to come back that way, but will allow fluid to come in this way. But we'll explain that as we go. So the first thing we're going to do is prepare this area, prepare the tank, get the pump mounted and wired in, and then we'll do the outlet plumbing from the pump, and we'll put the injector and talk about that when it's time. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to mount the pump. So we're going to move this stuff out of the way. Bring the pump mount back. Now the pump mount, I usually put it right at the front of this center part of the tank, because it has the most structure that way. And then the screws that we provide, you're going to use the longer of the 2 to screw it to the actual tank. So I put the longer of the 2 in there, and then we're going to get a bit to screw these in and run them in. But I usually get this exactly parallel with the back and centered in there, and then screw this in. So let me get a bit and we'll screw this in. Okay, so we're going to get the drill bit here, make sure it's centered, or I mean the screw bit. Tighten it down. So that's mounted there. And then the pump itself, there is this top part that actually has the cover that we want that facing up, so that way if anything leaks, it leaks below it and don't run down to it. So when we do this, we're going to mount this to the bracket like that, and we're going to use the smaller Phillips head screws that were supplied with the unit. Once we have it mounted to the tank, then we're going to drill a hole in the tank to put the suction tube out. Now on the pump, it's kind of hard to see here, but there is arrows. There's an out arrow and an in arrow. So our suction tube will go to the top, and then our out will go up to the filter here, but the arrow pointing away is out, the arrow pointing in is in. So we're going to go ahead and drill a hole here, and we want to drill a 1/4 inch exactly. If you drill a 1/4 inch hole, when we put this tubing through there, it'll fit really tight and it'll keep anything from getting in there, dirt or bugs or anything like that. So make sure you have a true 1/4 inch drill bit when you drill this hole. And I usually drill it somewhat out towards the side here. And the shavings should come back out. Now, if any shavings get in there, you can take a rag, a cloth, and the cloth itself will actually grab those shavings and you can pull them right out if they happen to get in there. But after we've drilled that 1/4 inch line, then we're gonna install the suction tubing inside the tank. So in order to do that, we're gonna take the lid off. The lid, you have to squeeze these 2 tabs and then turn it. That keeps kids from being able to get into this, since it could, you know, it does have a chemical in it. So it is a safety lid that you have to squeeze to get it open. Cut the tape off the tubing here. So you take the end of the tube and we're going to push it down through the hole, and it should fit somewhat tight. And then grab it inside the tank and bring it up through the hole here. And now we're going to install our weighted suction piece. And this is the weighted suction piece. You can see it has some screen on the bottom that helps keep any kind of dirt or anything from getting in there, or grit, or even possible shavings. So this literally just pushes in this. It has like a little pinch collar here that holds it in place. So we work it until you get it to go in there. It's kind of tough to get started, but once you get it started, then you can push it in. And what I do is I push it in until I see it go about halfway. You can see the tube in here. You can see where it goes about halfway into the actual screen. So once that's done, you're going to let it fall in the tank, and then you're going to continue to feed this down until that thing is about right around 1 inch off the bottom of the tank. And once it's there, then we can go ahead and run it up here, and we'll cut it off to where it fits properly to our actual pump. So I'm going to get something to cut it with, and we'll get the nuts and the ferrules to put it together with. So I have a tubing cutter here, but you can use a razor knife or whatever you want. I mean, just as long as it's nice and straight. You want a nice straight cut, you don't want it at a 45 angle, because it's less likely to seal in that case. And then there'll be a little package of nuts and ferrules, or sleeves they may be called, depending on what you're used to. But you're going to slide the nut on first. Don't drop it in the tank. And then if you look at these little sleeves or ferrules, they kind of look like a arrowhead. You can see how it's got a shoulder here and then a taper. Well, this taper always goes towards the unit you're inserting. So since this is going in the pump, it's going to go in that way, and then the nut's going to slide over top of it. So I'm going to literally put it on the tube exactly that way. I don't know if you can get in close enough and see that. Okay, once we have that ferrule on there, we're going to shove this tube in as far as it goes, slide the nut up against the ferrule and tighten it down. Now you'll see that the tube here will want to turn, so hold that with one hand and hold the nut with the other, and just snug this with your fingers. We don't need to put a bunch of wrenches or anything on here, because it usually seals really easily. Just hold the tube with this hand and then tighten the nut with the other hand. Okay, now once that's done, you can fill it with solution at this point. Now when I say fill it with solution, we send quite a bit, but I would recommend that you only put about 10 or 15 gallons in here at first and see how you use it, because you'd be surprised how conservative you would be with it. If you fill it all the way up and you don't use it for 3 years, it could lose intensity. So I usually put about 10 gallons in there and trend how it's going to go. If that 10 gallons lasts a year, then so be it. But if it lasts 3 months, then just every 3 months or so put another 10 gallons in it. But the longer you keep it in the container, the stronger it stays. So you're better off to leave it there before you put it in here until you absolutely need it. But once you pour your solution in, you can go ahead and put your tank back on, or I mean your cap back on, and make sure you tighten it all the way down so that child lock comes into play and they can't back it off and get hurt. So once that's done, now we're going to prepare the injector that will go into the plumbing, so we can do our outlet plumbing from the pump to the injector, and that's how we'll get peroxide into the unit. So I'm going to get the injector and prepare it, and then we're going to get it installed in here, and then I'll show you how to connect it from there. Okay, once we've put some Teflon tape on the injector, we'll screw it in place. Now this injector has two different threads on it. It has a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch thread. We're going to use the 1/2 inch thread because that's the bushings that we supply. So once you have that Teflon tape, we'll go ahead and screw that in until it's hand tight, and then go ahead and take your wrench or channel locks, whatever you have. If you use channel locks, just be careful not to score it up, but tighten it down, snug it in so you know it doesn't leak, and then that's installed and ready to go. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to run a tube from the outlet of the pump up to the injector. So again, we're going to use the ferrules and sleeves that were supplied with the unit, and we'll put the nut on, and then we'll put the sleeve on correctly. Let's show that again just so people understand how that goes. And we're going to push this into the pump. We're going to tighten it down by hand, then we're going to hold the tube and snug it up, continue to snug it up with our hands. Now this tube can run up and go into our injection point. I like to leave a little bit extra here just in case we have to revisit the fittings or the ends. If we need to cut some off, we have some extra. So I'm going to leave a little bit extra here, and we're going to cut this tubing. And then we're going to do the same thing with our outgoing tubing. We're going to put the nut on, and then we're going to put the injector on. And I'm going to run this in behind the plumbing and in. Put it all the way in until it stops. Let the nut fall down on there. Snug it down by hand. Like I said, you shouldn't need tools for this. You should be able to just snug it by hand. Okay, once that's done, we basically have the whole system plumbed in for water and liquid now. Now we need to do some connection points, and we need to put our filters in, and we'll start the unit up. One of the main connection points that we're going to do is we're going to connect the actual water meter wires to the correct wires on the pump. Now the pump itself has several wires here. There's a white, blue, green, brown, red, and black. The red and black will most likely be twisted together. We're going to separate those out. But we want to fold these other wires back, the blue, the brown, the green, and the white, because they're not used. But we want to make sure they don't touch anything else, and we want to make sure they don't touch each other. So I usually start with each one and just kind of get around it individually to make sure they're isolated. Then roll them back and tape them up. But you don't want them to touch each other or anything else. So once you do that and tape them all up, and you should just have the red and the black coming out of the pump. Same way here, we don't use the blue, we only use the red and the black. So the blue, we're going to fold down, and we're going to go ahead and put some tape around it and isolate it away from the connection point. Now for the purpose of this video, we're doing these connections just free in the open. There's no voltage here, so there's not like there's danger here. But if you want a good looking installation, you may want to get a little box or something and mount these wires in there, and then do your connection point in the box. It'll look a little better than just having it hanging. But for the purpose of this video, we're just showing the connections and whatnot. So now that we've isolated them, we're going to go red to red and black to black. So what I usually do is get them together and get a little bit of a twist on them first, and then use a little small wire nut. In this case, I got some little gray ones here. They might be too big, but it looks like they might work. No. But you can get some really small wire nuts and hook onto this, or if you want to use like a butt connector, you could use that. Just make sure it's isolated. Let me see if I can get these to work actually. These should work. There we go. Just didn't have it biting. Okay. And then do the same thing with the black. Make sure you get a good connection here, because if you don't have a good connection here, then the pump won't kick on and you won't get any peroxide. Okay, so now that we have the wires hooked together, you would have already put your peroxide in at this point. Now you have a power supply that just goes to a constantly energized 110 outlet. And we're going to go ahead and plug this in so I can show you some of the ins and outs of these pumps. You know, some of the questions and calls we get about this pump, because it can be in a standby mode or something else that causes a little bit of problems. So we're going to talk about it a bit. The first thing I'm going to do is take off the protective cover screw here. And then the cover should come off now. Slides off actually, but once the cover's off, can you come in here? I want you to see the screen here.